Hello, how you doing? Happy Friday. It's Friday yet again. The sun's coming out, so at least here it is in London, which is cool. It's good to see you again. Welcome to another Nemerin Live on YouTube and LinkedIn and all around the internet. So today we are going to be talking about how to label promotional video content correctly for both digital and broadcast. It's sort of easier said than done. Of course, advertisers are always keen to reach audiences, but let's face it, print audiences are dwindling. People are skipping through ad breaks, like it or not. People are watching SVOD more than ever. Even digital display is not as effective as it once was because of, dare I say it, ad blockers. So more and more brands are keen to be part of the content itself and work with influencers to reach those ever elusive audiences. In broadcast, that's through things like product placement and advertiser-funded programming, AFP. Online, it's sponsored content and working with influencers, but these are dangerous waters. It's easy to fall foul of regulators, mislead audiences, and of course, potentially even damage your brand. So you need to be super careful with this stuff. So the good news is we've got a dream team here of experts joining us on this Nemerin Live to kind of explain the kind of pros and cons and different processes and what you can and can't do and shouldn't be doing. So I'm joined by Dwayne Dedman, who is a broadcast regulatory consultant at Review and Cleared. Hi, Dwayne. How are you?
Very good, Peter. Thanks for having me.
All right, no problem at all. And influencer marketing expert Gordon Glenister. Hello, Gordon.
Hi, lovely to see you, Pete, as always.
Great to see you as well. Thank you guys very much indeed for joining us today. We've got loads of ground to clear and cover today. Don't forget, by the way, if you do have any questions for the team, we would love to hear from you. Just use the chat box on whichever platform you are using at the moment to fire over your questions. I'm sure the team would love to have a crack at answering them. Dwayne, let's start off with you first up, and let's sort of reset the room a little bit and maybe you can tell us a little bit about Reviewed and Cleared.
Yeah, of course. So Reviewed and Cleared is basically a law practice specializing in media. And we provide legal clearance and compliance advice on a whole host of content, whether that's printed, papers, digital, audio, and of course, audiovisual content for both advertising campaigns and programming content. Personally, I joined Reviewed and Cleared last February after working within various internal compliance departments across a number of UK-based broadcasters like UK TV, Sky, and BT.
Fantastic. Okay, now let's start off with the difference between product placements, which I can imagine lots of the audience will have heard of. Obviously, it's been around for a while, and prop placement, because they're similar but fundamentally different at the same time. Could you explain the difference?
Yeah, of course. I think we've got a slide as well, actually, because this year celebrates the 10th anniversary of product placement being allowed in the United Kingdom. And I think there's an arrow to demonstrate on the next. There you go. That is the first product placement placed on ITVs this morning in 2011. And as you can see, it's quite conspicuous, a Nestle coffee machine on the back of this morning's set. But that was the first one out the door. As you say, there are a couple of key differences. The first, I guess, is about the definition. So in prop placement, a prop is given to a production for free. No money changes hand and no guarantees can take place about how exactly that product or service will be used in the program. In product placement, a payment is given to the production company or broadcaster for a product or service to be placed in the program. And that's where the key difference really comes into play, because the big plus for product placement is that brands can have guarantees about how their product or service will appear in the program. And for prop arrangements, you can't have any of that. The production company can choose to use the product in any way they see fit, or of course not to use the product at all. So in product placement, the brand can have written contractual guarantees about how it's used and by which character or which presenter. So for instance, a car brand could have guarantees that their car was driven by a specific character in a soap opera, for instance. And that's the key difference. In prop, there's no guarantees. In product, you absolutely can.
So actually, if we go back to that this morning graphic, and we can see looks like an Nespresso machine in the background. That was obviously paid for by Nespresso. They felt that the audience was correct, and it's there, but it's not there. It's kind of prominent to an extent, but it's not really intrusive. So good example of product placement.
Exactly, and I think although Phil the chef there didn't mention it, no one used it. They didn't make coffee on the set that morning. What was so key for Nestle and ITV was to be first out the door and generate the massive press and media interest that generated. I think the deal was worth around £100,000, it was reported at the time, but the column inches it actually got in terms of being the very first UK product placement offering probably doubled the value for the brand and ITV.
And if we look at the other elements in that particular shot, so we've got things like the oven, the pots and pans, and so on, which are all very nice and probably from I don't know, John Lewis or somewhere. But that's an example of prop because they're not really prominent and you can't see logos and so on.
Exactly. Yeah. Arguably, although that Nestle coffee machine, which is arrowed, was a product placement, arguably, before the rules, it could have still been there under prop. But again, the reason why Nestle wanted to be the first and ITV wanted to be the first was to make a big splash about it in the industry press, about the very fact that it was the first one out the door.
Would you be able to touch on the rules? Because I appreciate that Ofcom rules are a little bit more established, should we say, than perhaps in like the publishing industry, which is a bit more of a free-for-all.
Yes. So yeah, of course. There are a number of rules, as you'd expect, in the Ofcom code. But it's probably easier, rather than go through one at a time, to talk about the principles, I guess, which underpin the rules. The first principle is about editorial independence. And that really means that the broadcaster, because it owns the relationship, it has a license to broadcast with Ofcom, ultimate control over programming has to be retained by the broadcaster. Now, that doesn't mean that negotiations can't take place about how products will be used within shows. It just means that because broadcasters, again, because they own that relationship with Ofcom, they have to maintain ultimate control, and they'll always insist on wording of that effect in contracts. The second big principle is around the distinction between editorial content and advertising. Now, this means that there needs to be an editorial justification. There needs to be a good reason why products are seen in specific formats or in the hands of specific characters. It also means that any sales language, like pricing or availability information, can't appear in product placement arrangements. But to mitigate that, of course, commercials can air in advertising airtime in and around the shows to complement the placing within the show itself. Another principle, which this session is going to talk about, I think, is about transparency. And to make viewers aware that programs do contain product placement, signalling has to take place. And you've probably seen that on a myriad of TV shows. It takes the place of a black and white P logo, which pops up before, during, and after the show containing product placement airs. And finally, it's probably worth mentioning that some brands, such as alcohol, gambling, and foods and drinks high in fat, salt, or sugar, can't product place. And of course, some programming, like news, current affairs, and kids programs, also can't contain product placement. There are, as you can imagine, a lot of other rules, but they're the kind of three basic principles that underpin the vast majority of the rules.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so if it's prop placement, no P logo at the beginning of the TV show, but if it's product placement or AFP with some branding in there, the audience will be made aware by a little P that appears in the corner of the opening few seconds of a TV show. That makes sense. Do you have a couple of examples maybe you could talk to us about, Dwayne?
Yeah, of course. I guess in the 10 years that product placement's been around, the programs that have successfully exploited the rules tend to be scripted formats, which air on the most popular channels. So soaps like Hollyoaks and Coronation Street have had lots of PP deals over the years. I think there's a slide to talk about Coronation Street. There's been a nationwide ATM in Deb's corner shop, as well as nationwide posters on the street itself. Costa and the Co-op have had shops on the cobbles, and the Rovers Return was recently put up for sale by Purple Bricks. And you can see the signage there was attached to the pub. In reality formats, they're another good example of how they've exploited the rules. The X Factor and Towie on ITV have done very well in this space. In the example of Towie, they kind of exploited it in a very interesting, innovative way. Some music tracks from an album called The Ministry of Sound's Marbella Sessions was actually used as background music in a few episodes of Towie, and some of the cast attended the launch party too. So product placement can not only be seen, it can also be heard. And in the X Factor, ITV successfully defended complaints about the mobile network operator 3 appearing on the back of mobile phones, some of the contestants' mobile phones. And viewers complained because they were surprised that the 3 logo was on the back of mobile phones, because obviously 3 isn't a mobile phone manufacturer like Apple or Samsung. And although Ofcom recognised this in their adjudication, which was published, they said that while viewers may have found the placement more noticeable, the placement wasn't out of keeping with the programme's style or content. So they rejected the complaints. So those are the 3 examples. But as you can see, they're from mainstream broadcasters, ITV in those 3 examples, that generate the viewership, and they're kind of scripted. They can be planned in advance, which is a kind of a big obstacle for product placement.
Yeah, and I suppose you could argue with the X Factor example there. That's an example of a brand potentially overstepping the mark a little bit in terms of the unwritten agreement with the audience. Like, okay, I'll take a little bit of branding, but don't overdo it, which is quite interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what the viewers complained about when they wrote or contacted Ofcom about it, because obviously if you buy a mobile phone, you won't see a 3 logo on the back of it. You'll see an Apple logo, for instance. But Ofcom rejected those complaints because they felt that, again, the program style or content wasn't unduly affected by having a 3 logo on the back of the mobile phone set. So I think it was quite a good example of ITV perhaps pushing the line, but not overstepping that line. So I think it's a good example of where a broadcaster and a brand can bravely kind of work together to make sure that the 3 logo and the 3 brand was exposed to a wide audience without compromising the code. So I think it's a good example, and Ofcom supported that.
Yeah. So if you were speaking to a brand or advising a brand, what would you say are the major challenges in terms of getting a product into a TV show, and potentially what are some of the solutions?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of challenges. Despite it being around for 10 years now, it's not really taken root as we all hoped back in 2010, 2011 when it was starting off. I think the first challenge is, I guess, a practical one. Some broadcasters simply aren't large enough to contemplate product placement in terms of their size and scale. So from a logistical point of view, it really boils down to value and distribution. And as mentioned, only those programs with a big enough audience have made a real success of PP over the last 10 years. Also, it's true to say that a lot of internal departments have to be aligned and even aware of the potential of product placement. And some broadcasters' internal structures mean that it's difficult to get it off the ground. Another challenge specific to media agencies and brands are that they might not be aware or aligned with the production timelines in terms of their own budget cycles or their priorities. So it simply might not be the right time to consider product placement. And I think the final main challenge, which kind of encapsulates those two as well, is the sheer time and effort involved from the many different parties. You've got media agencies, brand marketing managers, production companies, broadcasters, which all mean that product placement sadly has an unfortunate reputation of being too time consuming and too difficult to be worthwhile. So I think those are the 3 main reasons why it really hasn't taken to life as we all hoped. You asked about solutions. In terms of size and scale, I think arguably there's never been a better time to reconsider product placement, because commercial broadcasters are frankly up against it. Their funding is being slashed. There are lots more platforms for brands to advertise their wares on, and also the genuine threat from streamers like Netflix, Amazon, and Disney Plus. So they're less reliant on advertising, the traditional advertising routes. They're more reliant now on finding new revenue. So I think product placement arguably is a good time now for brands and broadcasters to reconsider it. On the alignment challenge, I think broadcasters need to understand a brand's objectives when they start those early conversations about why they want to product place in their programs. And spending cycles and media agencies need to know what's really coming down the broadcaster's pipeline. So relationship building is crucial. The negative perception of the time and effort involved. I mean, there's not a quick silver bullet here, but the more brands and broadcasters embrace and try to exploit the concepts of PP, I think this would reduce the negative perception, as well as perhaps remedying some of the other challenges.
I suppose the other good thing is that audiences are kind of probably more receptive to product placement than they have been for a long time, in part thanks to what's happening on the digital side. Sort of with that in mind, let's have a quick chat with Gordon. We'll be going back to Dwayne in a moment to talk about ad-funded programming, which is a whole other kettle of fish. But Gordon, let's have a look at the online world. It's kind of often seen as less tightly regulated than TV, which is really strictly controlled, as we heard from Dwayne, in terms of product placement, logos, and so on. First of all, can you introduce yourself? And kind of second of all, would you agree in terms of that light touch regulation? Is that the case?
Yeah, so lovely to be here, Pete. Gordon Glenister. I'm the global head of influence marketing at the Branded Content Marketing Association. I'm also a podcaster on influence, and as you can see behind me, I'm an author on influencer marketing strategy. So I think things have changed. I mean, I guess for those of you that don't understand and really know what influencer marketing is all about, it's been a meteoric rise. It's now expected to be a sort of $15 billion industry. And when you consider in 2016, it was just around 1.6 billion. So it really has grown. We trust the opinions of others more than we do traditional advertising. And I think just listening to Dwayne and seeing how some of these other advertising revenues, particularly on TV, are changing, that's because people want trust. Trust is really important when it comes to advertising. So I think there's going to be, and also I think they love the authenticity around influencers. And we're seeing a lot of that, even in the style of content. That raw footage is showing huge growth at the moment. People don't like the over-filtered, over-curated content. I mean, look at some of the viral videos that have gone huge. It's been phenomenal. That's because it's like one of, and I think this has been particularly true of the pandemic in the last 12 months. It's been a great leveler for us all, and I think we don't want to be oversold to, and particularly amongst Generation Z, more than anything else.
Do you have some examples of brands that are using influencers really well? Even from a labeling perspective, where it's clear that it is an ad.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got an entire, particularly around fashion and beauty, who've been some of the big growth areas. People like Boohoo. I mean, now if you think about that brand alone, and Gymshark. Gymshark was founded by a 23-year-old guy. It's now worth over £1 billion. Their entire model was founded around using influencers to drive their brand forwards. Pretty Little Thing, Nasty Gal, lots of others that have really nailed it. And why they've been successful, because they're now starting to appear on other forms of advertising. So their content is so relevant and their audience really relates to it. I was on the tube the other day, and of course I'm seeing all of these famous influencers all around the billboards. So, this is what's happening. We're seeing repurposed content with these individuals talking to their specific audiences. Emma Chamberlain, for example, famous YouTuber, has worked really well with brands like Louis Vuitton. And then what they'll do is invite them to London Fashion Week, events like that. I mean, even when I've been interviewing on stage influencers, I remember at the B2B Marketing Expo a few years ago in 2019, we had the biggest audience of all of the Seminole theatres. And so people just came because this influencer was there. It's in some instances, it's like fan worship. I don't know if any of your viewers have even been to VidCon, and the queues waiting for these individuals just to have photos with their famous content creator is just staggering.
But then obviously there has been some controversy in terms of some influencers not really playing by the rules, in terms of they're being paid to promote a product, but they're not labeling it clearly. Or the kind of hashtag ad is kind of hidden a little bit. What are the general rules, and how are they enforced, and if they are enforced, like by whom, for online content with influencers?
So, I mean, obviously the universal term is hashtag ad, and that should be not buried in any of the hashtags at all. It should be very clear and identifiable. If there has been any form of coercion by the brand, in other words, a requirement for them to post something or on stories in any shape or form, then that should be clear. I think one of the problems that we faced is still one of ignorance and education, which is why the Advertising Standards Authority, the Branded Content Marketing Association, who've recently laid out a set of best practice guidelines, which any of your viewers want to download from the BCMA website, they can do so. And also, sometimes I think people feel they can get away with it. So, that there has to be more punitive efforts made by the ASA, and that is starting to happen now. I think then lastly, for some people, they think it's going to affect their engagement if they actually post these. So I think that is also a challenge. One thing and we were very, very supportive of the ASA, by the way. They did a big research on this in September last year, where they reviewed 122 online influencers, and they looked at 24,000 Instagram posts, stories, and reels. What they certainly found was an inconsistency in the disclosures, and whether and that was so they may have put them on the post but not on the story, because if the content was repurposed, then it wasn't necessarily been disclosed. They also found out that if it was their own brand, then just the bio itself wasn't enough to be able to say that they were there was a connection with that brand. So that was another issue. Also affiliation, if they were working with like a 10% discount or any sort of tags or links, then that was still not being disclosed enough. So I think what the ASA have been doing is monitoring these individuals, and they've called it their sort of on watch. But if those individuals are not, then after, it's almost like giving them a warning sign. If they're not prepared to continue to make changes, they've written to all those 122, by the way. If they're not prepared to make those changes, then I think a further action would be taken, because no influencer wants to be sort of shamed online, because that, of course, will denigrate their sort of brand collaboration opportunities in the future. So, yeah. And I've been a great fan of clamping down, and I think that should be the case, because I think what message does it say if the bigger influencers are not doing it properly for the people coming into the market? And they think, well, actually, why should I bother if XYZ isn't doing it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it just seems that sort of the broadcast world and the digital world are sort of poles apart, really. I can't imagine ITV would do a deal with a brand and then not, use the product placement logo correctly. That would definitely end in tears. But it just seems on the digital side that you're really only at kind of risk of having a slap on the wrist. What are the kind of real world consequences other than just being told off? Can he go to jail? Is there a fine for not doing this stuff properly?
No, I mean, nobody in the UK has had that. I think in America there have been more punitive measures in place, but no, there haven't been. It's just reputation damage more than anything else, which can be harmful, of course. I mean, brands, one of the issues we have with influencer marketing is brand safety, is making sure that brands do proper due diligence before embarking on an influencer. And I think that is super important, more than ever. And yes, there are tools that enable them to do that, but things like age validation, checking the quality of their audience, and it's that they've not bought followers, for example, looking at their last posts, that they haven't done activations with their competitors. Have they got a business profile account? I know it sounds obvious, but if they don't have a business account, they'll not be able to get the analytics. If they're a UK brand, what's the percentage of their audience that is based in the UK versus, in America? Because if you're wanting to work with an influencer and 60% of their audience is based outside of the UK, well, then your available potential reach is only that 40%.
Yeah, I guess that actually brings me on to the next question. We're going to go back to Dwayne in a moment to talk about AFP, but another quick question just in regards to kind of the globalness of digital online content is, again, it goes back to regulation. If, I don't know, the Kardashians, for example, bad example, but if they were promoting a brand and that campaign was executed in North America, how would that be regulated here if they didn't use #ad? So I'm sure they would, because obviously they're kind of market leaders, as it were. But if it was a more junior influencer and the campaign was, I don't know, sealed in South America, North America, Australia, Asia, etc., how can that be regulated or enforced here?
Well, it's one of the challenges is running global campaigns, because there are different requirements in different markets. And that's why some of the bigger influencers will work with legal professionals, will work with agents to ensure that these things are done properly. It's about doing your due diligence. There are different laws in Germany, for example, around disclosures, things that might be acceptable in one country and not in another. So you really do need to be careful about what you do, because you can be exposed. There's no two ways about it. But that's why there are lots of guidance around. As I say, the Branded Content Marketing Association produced such guidance. I'm sure Dwayne's organization, as well as lawyers in the space, and I know Lewis Silkin and others that we work with, produce all sorts of guidance around this, and the ASA as well. So ignorance is no excuse for not doing things properly.
No, not nowadays. So if in doubt, if you're being paid for by a brand and you're an influencer, just go with #ad. And if the content's good, I guess the audience doesn't really care.
Yeah, exactly.
Dwayne, let's chat about broadcast again, and more specifically AFP, ad-funded programming. So it's a huge growth area for broadcasters and production companies such as ourselves as well. Can you just explain, first of all, what is it, and how can brands actually be part of the content itself, as opposed to just being a product within the content?
Yeah, sure. So advertiser funded programming, as you say, is kind of on the up. And another phrase to describe it is branded content, which you use in the digital space. But basically, it's where brands co-fund or fully fund TV formats. It's as simple as that. But from a brand point of view, more strategically and advantageously from their point of view, they can even originate and develop a format. So if they come up with an idea, maybe in partnership with a production company, pitch it to a broadcaster who then greenlights it, they can see their idea concept on the screen, which obviously is great for the broadcaster. It's arguably cheaper programming. And as we said, from their program budgets being slashed, that's great from the broadcaster's point of view. but it's great from a brand point of view, because whatever it is that they want to convey, tell a story to viewers, will be able to do so, especially if they come up with the idea themselves. So advertiser-funded programming can work for broadcasters in terms of the cost effectiveness of it, but also from a brand point of view to convey that narrative they want to a wider audience, or a demographic that perhaps they can't reach from other advertising platforms.
So if it's an ad-funded programming, also known as brand-funded programming, there would be the product placement logo at the beginning, as there would be with just something that's normal product placement. Would there be any other indications to the audience that a brand like Dell, for example, has paid for the actual program itself?
Yeah, so advertiser-funded programming doesn't necessarily mean it's product placement. So advertiser-funded programming needs to be transparently made clear to the audience via sponsorship credits that sit outside the programming, kind of explaining this product sponsors this content. And I'm sure you've seen these in front of, Coronation Streets or any kind of program that's sponsored on commercial broadcasters, a 15-second piece of creative saying this sponsors that, basically. Product placement does work very well together with AFPs, but it doesn't necessarily mean that product placement always fits in with AFPs. So just to make that clear, so if product placement does exist at the same time as advertiser-funded programming, then the P logo would have to be aired to signal to audience that product placement is taking place. But even if product placement wasn't taking place and it's funded by a brand, then sponsorship creative credits are the way to convey to an audience that this brand is sponsoring that program.
And that's ultimately the goal, is to say this is a normal piece of, say, Channel 4 or ITV content, but a brand has paid for at least part of it, and just being transparent with the audience so they get it.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Via sponsorship credits, Ofcom make it very clear in their guidance notes that sponsors can be involved in the commissioning and creation of formats, providing, and this is the kind of exception really why sometimes they can't appear in the programs that they sponsor. So, for instance, if there was a back to the floor or behind the scenes format, and Sainsbury's wanted to be allowed it into cameras, so to show what goes on behind their warehouses or on the shop floor, Sainsbury's couldn't sponsor that content or fund it because the program is about the sponsor's interests. But like a recent example, Dulux has resurrected with a production company changing rooms on Channel 4, and they have co-funded that format. Now, Dulux probably does appear in that show. I've not had a chance to catch up with it on All Forage yet, but what it can't say is things like, oh, this paint gives an amazing sheen, etc., etc. So any efficacy claims like product placement can't be made for any sponsor that features in the show that they co-fund or fully fund. So again, that distinction between advertising and editorial needs to take place. So anything like, again, pricing, availability information, things like that can't take place.
And I have to say, in credit to the commissioners as well, they're all over this stuff. They just don't want brands to be too prominent. Otherwise, it's off-putting and defeats the whole object of doing it in the first place. So kind of kudos to them. Likewise with Ofcom as well, just making sure that it, feels reasonable to everybody involved. We're pretty much wrapped up. We've actually slightly run over. That was a very quick 30 minutes. We'll have to do this session again. One last question then to you both. And basically, if you had to give a piece of advice to a brand who's looking at sort of doing TV content or digital content, what would you say? Maybe starting with Dwayne.
Look, I suppose you'd expect me to say this, but the Ofcom rules and the guidelines can be somewhat thorny and problematic. So I guess my advice is, if you've got an idea and you think it's not possible, then I guess know your enemy, know the rules, and seek advice upstream as early as you possibly can, because there probably is a route to make sure that your idea can achieve your creative or editorial goals. So I would say this, wouldn't I? But, get advice as early as possible. And there's probably a way that you can see your idea on paper, make it to the screen in due time.
Brilliant. Same question to you, Gordon.
Thanks. I mean, mine's not too dissimilar in a way. I've actually put the suggested the influencer marketing guidelines that I talked about earlier. Influencer marketing delivers 11 times greater ROI than many other forms of advertising when done well. So the problem sometimes is people don't do it well. So when they do it well, it makes a big difference. So get that proper advice, whether it's through a consultant, whether it's through a legal expert, or actually just downloading some of the guidelines from the ASA or from the BCMA, then that's what it's there for.
Brilliant tips to end off this session. So Dwayne Dedman, broadcast regulatory consultant at Reviewed and Cleared, and influencer marketing expert Gordon Glenister. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. It's good to see you guys. So of course, brand funded content is incredibly powerful when executed correctly. Just make sure that you're fair to your audience and label the content properly. We would love to have a chat and explore options and share ideas. If we're not already working with you, we would love to get the ball rolling. Just drop me a line via LinkedIn, etc. if you want to get started. But that's about it for today. We'll be doing another Nemarin Live probably in a few weeks' time. So that's it for today. We're going to leave you with our 2021 show reel, and thanks for watching.
We are Nemarin Film and Video, the world's branded video agency. 2021 show reel.
Yeah, what's up, Phil?
In 2014, we started a revolution. In 2021, we've turned up the dial. On air and online across the globe. Creating content like this.
What we're trying to do has never been done before.
For brands like these.
It's an absolutely beautiful movie.
It does take your breath away.
Starting to tear up.
Our story is your story.
Nemarin.